Thank you, folks. Well, good evening. I'm Steve Ender, president at Grand Rapids Community College. You know, I couldn't help but think as I was watching these young people perform. In 1968, I was 18 years old and a freshman in college. And there was a lot going on in 1968. And we had a quad. And I will tell you, almost every week we were on that quad protesting something. You know, if it wasn't the Vietnam War, it was Nixon, it was pollution. And what struck me is we would be there one week railing against how we were destroying the earth, then we need to take care of the earth, and we'd be there the next week railing against something else, just totally demolishing the quad. You know, it was like, it was just about protesting. Things have changed, and it's wonderful to see 6 young people that feel so passionate about the issues that we're talking about tonight, that they dedicate their music to it. There's a sense of soul, I think. So I appreciate them a lot. They're a lot more mature than I was at 18, I've decided. This is a wonderful evening, and I just want a little background on how this came about. I truly wish that our Mayor, George Hartwell, could be with us this evening. George, I think, was the spark plug around sustainability for the city of Grand Rapids, and he brought together a group to really start a community sustainability partnership that encompassed about 80 different companies, several colleges and universities, and they did tremendous work. And the city was named as a national award for its sustainability efforts. And I know Dr. Haas has done tremendous work at his institution, and I think we're doing good work at our college. But George was concerned that the leadership that began that work had really kind of drifted away, and he needed to revitalize, from his perspective, the work of a group of people, and not all of us just kind of individually doing our own thing. And so he called President Haas and I to a meeting down at his office, and he pitched us, you know, on, well, what do you think? Would you provide some leadership? We need to put together a new steering committee. And, you know, Tom and I, sure, you know, this all sounds good, George. And Tom, this is how I think we get played a little bit. So I go back, and 2 days later, Marianne Lazert and Moss Ingram, some sustainability folks on our campus, they come in and, Dr. Ender, we have this great idea. You know, there's a traveling show going on right now that could do a public town hall meeting. We can really explore moral and ethical responsibilities. What do you think? Well, my job as a college president is to try to connect dots, and I'm going, geez, 2 days ago I was with Dr. Haas and the mayor, and now Marianne's got this group. You know, before we get into the details of how much is this going to cost, I'm going, oh, that's a great idea, Marianne. That's where I think we're getting played a little bit, Tom. There's no secrets in the castle. I'm convinced that our sustainability directors knew that we were meeting. You're very clever folks, Marianne. Not strange, clever. But I want to thank both of you and recognize you. Marianne and Moss Ingram have done tremendous work to make this evening possible. And I'll tell you, one meeting and they ran with this, and I'm very proud of the event that we're hosting tonight. I was asked to speak a little bit about, or to the question actually, and when the student came in from Marianne's English class and asked me the question, I said, well, how can I say no? You know, I mean, that's the quick, you know, off-the-cuff answer. Well, of course we have an ethical and moral responsibility. The deeper question, I think, is what does that mean? And again, I was struck with how we've made tremendous strides in this country around smoking and the health hazards of smoking. And I stopped smoking when my 6- and 8-year-old came home and said, Daddy, you're killing yourself. You know, and so I am convinced it's education of people that begins to bring some synergy and some sense of urgency to the question that we're going to explore. And it's simple things. And you laughed at me earlier. In Pittsburgh, if you ask people about sustainability, they'd first want you to define the word. Seriously, there's no sense of urgency around this issue. In Western Pennsylvania, or in Western Michigan, it is a community value. And Karen and I felt that very quickly coming to this town. And you're going to laugh at me, but I hadn't been here more than a month, and I stopped turning off the water when I brushed my teeth. I mean, it was like, what are you wasting that water for, Steve? I've never, so quickly this community starts to put a press on people that says, hey, are you aware of your behavior? Are you aware of your actions? And I think that's marvelous and says so much for Western Michigan and Grand Rapids. So we're here tonight to hear from the editors of this fine work and to hear from you, and we look forward to that discussion. I will tell you that Dr. Haas, the president of Grand Valley State University, has been a wonderful colleague and partner for us here at the community college. He and his wife, Marcia, for Karen and I, wonderful friends. And Tom, I like to say about our community college that we do the right things for the right people for the right reasons, and Tom Haas does the right things for the right people for the right reasons. And it's wonderful to have the partnership that we have and to sponsor this event tonight. So please, Tom, let's hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Let's see, in '68, I was just finishing up high school, and I went into service. So I want to know what you were protesting.
It was those little holes that I didn't want to get into, Tom. I just didn't want to get into.
All right, very good. Well, it was 1969 when I went into the Coast Guard. And from that point on, though, I grew up in New York City. And grew up in a small home where my dad knew every grass by name. Every blade of grass had a name. And interesting because you get to know nature in various ways. And he would, every year, have his tomato plants out there. Every year, he would do that. And he, I think, along with my mom, gave me the values that I have today. And that was to protect what you have, save, and ensure that it's around for the next generation's next generation. Well, 1969 I did go into the Coast Guard, and let me just give you a little story, and then I'm going to come up with maybe a little bit different tack than just the question that's on the table for tonight. But I went into the Coast Guard and actually had just an outstanding career. My career took me from being here on the Great Lakes. Met my wife in Traverse City, and on the Great Lakes, my first duty station was Port Huron, Michigan, on a buoy tender, taking care of our natural resources right here. Then I had a chance to go to University of Michigan, and I always enjoyed chemistry. I'm a chemist in my educational background, but I got into a discipline called environmental health sciences. And one of my mentors along the way said, hey, Tom, we really need someone to come on into Coast Guard headquarters and help us with the international transportation of hazardous materials. And so I said, that sounds pretty interesting. So I could take my chemistry, apply it into the environmental arena, and really kind of just grow in my appreciation of how important it was to take care of our environment. And again, through the lenses of my responsibilities in the Coast Guard. Well, we continued on and had a great tour in Washington, D.C. in the hazardous materials arena. Worked with the United Nations and the transportation of hazardous materials, setting up the protocols so we would have the safe shipment of cargoes in and out of U.S. ports. Well, went on. I had a chance to go to the Coast Guard Academy, teach chemistry. and do a little coaching. But in 1989, I got a call, and it was very, very late spring. And in March of that year, you might remember that there was a issue in Valdez where we did have the world's, at that point in time, most tragic case of an oil spill. And I was called up there because of my background to help assist and to see a pristine environment being soiled. And quite frankly, seeing our response, which was even more dramatic in terms of its impact, its negative impact on the environment. We were sterilizing shorelines, trying to quote-unquote clean it up. We had a company, an oil company, try and tell us that if we just wiped the tops of the rocks clean, it would be clean. Well, no, it wasn't, actually. That wasn't the right way to go. So continued on, and then I just had a chance throughout my time to come back to those roots from my New York days of understanding how important it was to protect the environment for the next generations. And then I had a chance to be a president of an agriculture and technology college in upstate New York. And before that, my wife and I were in Iowa, learning, again, some of the values associated with sustainability. And, in fact, more importantly, the term stewardship came to mind. And it's one of my watchwords today, along with service and relevance. And so what we're able to do and through this story is just share with you that you can have a passion, and now we have it here at Grand Valley State University. We had it in New York at an ag and tech college. We have it here. And I'm so pleased and thankful that there was leaders before me here at Grand Valley State University that could see how important this was for the next generations. And I have one of my colleagues, Norm Christopher's here. Norm's doing a tremendous job at Grand Valley State University, along with our dean, Wendy Winter, and the Brooks College of Interdisciplinary Studies, because that's where it all fits. I was able to sign in New York the Taylor's Agreement as well as the President's climate commitment. We do the same thing here. But what I've seen over these, I've been here now almost 5 years, the maturation of Grand Valley State University in its commitment to sustainability and how that has changed very, very quickly, actually, from, and this is very, very important to know that we were pushed at Grand Valley more by our students than anything else. But that what we could see is that we've had a transformation occur in the last 5 years in our understanding of how important it is to, yes, understand the triple bottom line, but more importantly, how sustainability has changed itself on the campus from a strategy to help us achieve our mission to really embracing it as a value. And in fact, it has been now part of what I call our evolving DNA as an institution to understand how important sustainability is. Coming back to that notion of stewardship. But this is what I wanted to end up with. I can go through all the facts and the figures of 16 LEED certified buildings and all the other activities we have in the curriculum and in the service and the like, but really it comes down to this, and it comes from a book that I have grown with great appreciation over the last 15 years. Jim O'Toole put this book together called Leading Change, Overcoming the Ideology of Comfort and the Tyranny of Custom. But today's question that's on the table, moral obligation, is this, and this is what I really wanted to share with you. It's not situational leadership, but what Jim argues is that maybe this amoral leadership is very ineffective. Instead, he shows that successful leadership is ultimately rooted in the high moral purpose and a consistent display of respect. That's what the answer is for the generations to come. thank you all, and I appreciate the opportunity of sharing some of those words with you, some of those thoughts that I have. I really do appreciate the leadership and support and the friendship of the Enders. Again, it's great to have colleagues that embrace the notion of education for the future in a very optimistic way, and Steve does that. I'm thrilled to call him a great colleague, but I'm also so pleased to call him a great friend. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. And just to end up, I know that I did talk to George at lunch. He was sorry he couldn't be here tonight, but he has provided great leadership here in Grand Rapids. Again, as Steve was mentioning, on bringing Grand Rapids into a better future for everyone. So thank you, and I look forward to our speakers. Thank you.
All right, we're off to a wonderful start. I wanted to just mention a little bit about Moral Ground, Ethical Action for a Planet in Peril. The book that brought us here tonight, edited by Kathleen Dean Moore and Michael Nelson. The book offers the thoughts of over 80 visionaries. The Dalai Lama, Barack Obama, Thomas Berry, Thomas Friedman, Terry Tempest Williams, Bill McKibben, Barbara Kingsolver, Derek Jensen, Wendell Berry, Wangari Maathai, Linda Hogan, Bell Hooks, and Scott Momaday, Ursula Le Guin, and many others, who beckon us all in our own communities to identify principled reasons for doing the right thing for our planet, its animals, its plants, and its people. Kathleen Dean Moore, one of those editors, is a distinguished professor of philosophy and university writer laureate at Oregon State University, where she teaches environmental ethics and moral reasoning. By her own definition, her books all deal with personal narratives about our culture and spiritual relations to wet, wild places. So I think she's got something akin with us in the Great Lakes states. One of her most recent books, Wild Comfort, was published this year. She's also the founding director of the Spring Creek Project for Ideas, Nature, and the Written Word, which has as its mission to bring together practical wisdom of the environmental sciences, the clarity of philosophy, and the emotive power of the written word to reimagine our relation to the natural world. And again, I thank Kathleen from the bottom of my heart for traveling today. I should probably tell a very brief story and confess. My husband, if she gets a chance to meet him later, would tell her that I cannot be trusted with weather predictions. He would go on to expand about a story when I had several people from Louisville, Kentucky, on the beaches of the Manistee National Forest, watching the Perseid meteor shower, and I kept telling them, no, that storm is way far off. And I just said, we lived, so what if we had to crawl back in the dark and it was raining so hard and thundering and lightning above our heads? We saw some great meteor showers. So thanks, Kathleen. I'm not to be trusted again, probably. I told her, go ahead, get on the plane. But she made it. And like a true nature writer and philosopher, do you know what she said right off the plane? You gotta love this. She said, well, I lived, and the purple clouds against the reddening leaves are so beautiful. She said that. Our other editor is Michael P. Nelson, and he is a professor of environmental ethics and philosophy at Michigan State University. He's also the author of many scholarly articles, as well as co-editor of 3 books on environmental philosophy: The Great New Wilderness Debate, The Wilderness Debate Rages On, and American Indian Environmental Ethics. Michael is also resident philosopher, get this job title, resident philosopher of the Isle Royal Wolf and Moose Project. Welcome, Kathleen and Michael, and I'd like to turn over the stage to you.
know, you always say, you always say, I'm really glad to be here. Tonight, I'm really glad to be here. I could be dead. My nerves are shot. I smell like burning insulation, so don't get very close. We are so excited to be sharing the stage with that great concert and that great band, and we're so proud of the work that you're doing here and really impressed. And if you're students here and if you have the chance to have Marianne as a professor, boy, I think you're really lucky. So thank you for including us in your plans and in your classes. So here we are. After 4.6 billion years of evolution, where the Earth has achieved probably the greatest flourishing, the greatest abundance of life, the greatest variety of life this planet has ever seen. And it all comes down to this. After all that time, it comes down to us. In this, in this decade, maybe? We have a decade. You know, like, why us? I'm not sure we're up to it. I mean, we will live to see the beginning of a new way of living on Earth. And it's up to us to decide whether that new way of living on Earth is a beautiful community-based, music-based celebration of the community of all living beings, or whether it's a slide, inexorable slide down towards a more brutal, a more degraded, a more destabilized world. It's really up to us. And the extraordinarily important nature of that fact makes it so much more astonishing that we're not all talking about it. You'd think we would talk about nothing else. You'd think we would gather on the street corners and talk in whispers so we don't scare the children, saying, what is coming? What kind of world is coming? What are we going to do?
Is my mic? Is this on?
Talk.
I'm talking. Oh, there it's on. The writer Derek Jensen, who has an essay in our book, asks us to think about it this way, just imagine it this way. He says, what if it was aliens that were doing this to us? You know, I mean, imagine, right, a spacecraft lands in little, I'm sure they're green. They get out and they walk around and they go about busily doing the things that we've been doing,
but
right?
You know, there's no UFO up there.
Oh, there's no UFO. I have a picture of a UFO. It really lightens it. It's not.
Okay.
So the little aliens go around and they pour poisons into the river, and they kill 1 out of every 10 species of wild organism. They scrape the tops off of mountains and they dump the rest into the valleys. They lace our agricultural fields with poisons. They seed cancer in every product. They empty our aquifers and they make our rivers undrinkable. They torch our forests. They inject CO2 into the air until the climate itself turns against us. And they take all the resources. Ooh.
There.
Yeah. You know those aliens. And they take all the resources for themselves and they leave nothing for our children. What would we do if it was aliens that was doing this to us? I think the point is that we probably would do a little bit more than just swap out our compact fluorescent light bulbs and call it a day. You know, we probably wouldn't delay until we had scientific proof that it was really aliens that were doing this. It would call for an amazing mobilization, and we would, I don't know if we'd be successful, but we certainly would try. So that's what we would do, but the question is, what do we do? And I don't know about you, but I don't feel like I do very much most of the time.
So here's the premise behind what we're doing with this project. Climate change is a technological issue, that's true. And climate change is a scientific issue. It's an economic issue. It is about jobs. But primarily at the fundamental basis, climate change is a moral issue. And here's what we believe. We'll be just really straightforward about it. We really believe that taking what we want for our comfortable lives, taking whatever we want and leaving for the people who come after us a degraded, debased, destabilized world isn't worthy of us as moral beings. and that we have an affirmative moral action. We have affirmative moral obligation to take action, to leave a world that is rich in possibilities for the people who come next, for the world that comes next, and to avert the worst effects of climate change. That's what we most deeply believe. That's the premise behind what we're doing.
So as much as I like aliens, and I do like aliens, I'm a philosophy professor, so what I really like are arguments, which you can't quite compare the two, I realize. But so one of the ways to think about this is to think about the project. It worked. It's aliens, isn't it? Yeah, just click it down more. To think about it as an argument, as a formal argument, and we think about just real sort of simply what an argument is. An argument is a position that ends in a conclusion for which we provide evidence. We call those premises, and we support a conclusion. The practical syllogism actually that sort of frames the entire book, that really the whole book is really about this syllogism. And it's really just, it's this syllogism that we have these descriptions. We know the science. Scientists have been doing this kind of heroic work for a long time, telling us about the condition of the world that we live in, that climate change is real, that it's deeply dangerous, that it's upon us. And what we often try to do is we think, well, therefore we ought to do something. But what happens is scientists present that, and then they usually go like this. You've seen it sometimes like this if they're right-handed. But nobody does anything. Nobody responds, and so then they go like this. And what do they do as a response? And they redouble their efforts, and they speak with a single voice, and they fret about their communication skills, and they write journals and have conferences about we're just not communicating right. But the problem is, it's really not a communications problem, it's really a logical problem. And the logical problem is really captured here, that you can't arrive at a conclusion that suggests that you ought to do something from a series of facts alone. It doesn't matter how correct your facts are, how many you have. There is no set of facts all by themselves that allow you to arrive at a conclusion that suggests that you ought to do something. For that, you need another premise. You need a missing premise. We originally called this project the Second Premise Project. And so you need to fill in this normative P2 up there. This is what we value. This is what we believe is right. This is how we think the world should be. So one of the ways to think of this project is the attempt to ask that question about our values and to have us sort of start to talk about these values, this missing second premise.
So who is it who does the work of the second premise? Traditionally, it's who is the people who articulate the values? Who are the people who affirm the obligations? It is civic conversation in every one of its manifestations. It's families, it's churches, it's corner conversations. It is traditionally universities, where these great conversations about what we value take place. And you know, we think it's really, really disastrous that this second premise is missing from our national conversation to the extent that it is. Because when you look back in history, when you look at history, it's not that it's economics that drives all our decisions. People say, oh, you know, Kathy and Michael, why are you working all this time on ethics? You know that social change doesn't happen because of ethics. Social change happens because of economics. Well, I just think that's a misreading of history. If you look at history, you can see that when our society has changed on a dime, when we've made radical, fundamental changes, it's almost always been as a response to a great rising wave of moral affirmation. You think about the Declaration of Independence, a rising wave of acclamation of the great rights of humankind. Think about the emancipation of the slaves, a long time coming. But when it did come, it came as a result of not economic arguments, for heaven's sake. It came as a result of this rising affirmation of the dignity and worth of human beings, all of us.
There we go.
You know, if Al Gore didn't have a PowerPoint, we probably wouldn't bother. But since Al Gore had one, you know,
we're having Al Gore envy. Yeah, I never thought I'd say that.
So, yeah, Al Gore envy. Yeah. You think about the civil rights movement, which is pictured here. You know, Martin Luther King didn't say, I have a problem with the Well, what he said was, I have a dream. And it was a dream of opportunity. It was a dream of equality. It was a dream for dignity. He said, he didn't say, like, I want to integrate 350 lunch counters. He said, let the justice roll down like the mighty waters. It was a great moral affirmation. So we think that this may be the way to work this problem. Can we find it in ourselves to put together this swelling affirmation that it's not worthy of us to wreck the world, but that in fact we have an obligation to the future?
And if we're right, I mean, once the first premise is established as true, and once the second premise is established, that we do have this affirmative obligation to the future, I think the conclusion is, or one of the implications of the conclusion is that we can't refuse to act and still consider ourselves moral beings. So this is what the book project is. I actually like just pushing it, and it's kind of fun. What we did with this book project is we asked 100 moral leaders, people that other people look to for moral guidance. We didn't wonder if they should look to them. We just asked different people. We knew people would have different positions. We asked people from all over the world. We got 6 out of the 7 continents. We failed with Antarctica. We apologize for that. We asked people from various religious backgrounds. We asked business leaders. We asked philosophers. Maybe somebody would listen to them if we put them in a book like this. We asked scientists. How would they articulate this idea of an affirmative obligation to the future to leave a world as rich in life and possibilities as the world that was left to them? And so what we ended up with we actually have 100 essays. There'll be about a dozen that'll be online, but 83, I think, in the book. And this kind of, outpouring of different kinds of affirmation. All of them said yes, but they articulated this affirmation in a very different way, in a unique way. And so we thought, well, that's great. That's a great start. That's 100, but that's hardly enough, even though, Barack Obama might count for 2, that we need more than that. We need a richer conversation. So that's the reason for this town hall tour. We want to hear from other people why we have this moral obligation, and to see, to kind of enrich our moral voices, to kind of reclaim that ability to have a conversation about the second premise. So there's a lot of pluralism in the answers that we received, a huge amount of pluralism. There isn't a one right answer. We're not really looking for a one right answer. Actually, I think there are 14 right answers, because they seem to sort of segregate themselves into 14 different reasons. And we thought that that's really powerful, and it's really indicative that, boy, we're actually not as bad at this as we might have led ourselves to believe. We actually do know how to make a kind of value utterance and defend it. Maybe we can fill in that moral premise. So one of the things we want to do is we want to just share with you a few of these examples of these different kinds of arguments that we saw. We'll just sort of give you a little snippet so you can see the kinds of things that people said. Well, it's sort of like a brainstorming session here.
Many of the people who wrote back to us made an appeal for the sake of the children. Yes, we have an obligation to the future for the sake of the children. And the argument, if we use our syllogism, the argument works like this. If we have a moral obligation to protect children, and my God, if we don't have an obligation to protect children, what obligations do we have? If we have a moral obligation to protect children, and if climate change and environmental degradation are manifestly harmful to children, as they are, then we have a moral obligation to avert the worst effects of the environmental emergencies. This piece that I want to read you is from Thomas Friedman's essay. I'll read you a very short excerpt from a speech he quoted by a 12-year-old girl whose name was Severin Suzuki, who was speaking at the Rio meetings in 1992. She said, in part, "I'm only a child and I don't have all the solutions, but I want you to realize neither do you. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there's now desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. We are your own children. You are deciding what kind of world we're growing up in. Parents should be able to comfort their children by saying, everything's going to be all right. It's not the end of the world. But I don't think you can say that to us anymore. My dad always says, you are what you do, not what you say. Well, what you do makes me cry at night. Thank you.
Excellent. So another argument, another section of the book suggests that we have an obligation to the future because our lives depend upon it. And actually, this section, in a way, I mean, it didn't surprise me that people said this. Of course, if you're not paying attention, you might miss it. But it actually surprised me who showed up in this section. I think the Dalai Lama's in this section. I was expecting the Dalai Lama to write something about compassion, but it's more like, oh my God, we're going to die, which I mean, fair enough. But one of the writers who wrote and appealed to this kind of an argument, and the argument roughly goes something like this, that environmental degradation threatens the foundation of human survival, and that human survival is valuable. It's important to maintain humanity. Therefore, we have an obligation to avert the degradation that actually does threaten us. And so Daniel Quinn, who's the author of Ishmael, you may have read Ishmael, wrote an essay that appealed to this, and I'll just read you a short piece from his essay. He says, the real question is whether we can survive another 90 years in a period of mass extinctions, a period in which between 1.6 and 5 million species are likely to become extinct, even if extinction rates remain stable. We are like people living in the penthouse of a 100-story building. Every day, we go downstairs and at random knock out 150 bricks to take upstairs to increase the size of our penthouse. Since the building below consists of millions of bricks, this seems harmless enough for a single day. But for 30,000 days? Eventually, inevitably, the streams of vacancy we have created in the fabric of the walls below will come together to produce a complete structural collapse. When this happens, if it is allowed to happen, we will join the general collapse, and our lofty position at the top of the structure will not save us.
Another set of reasons were really based on the notion that we love the earth. We could start with that as an expression of fact. We love this beautiful, life-sustaining earth. Well, what does it mean to love a place? It means to care for it, if it means anything at all, and defend it. So if we truly do love the earth, then we have a moral obligation to defend it. And the piece that I'd like to read to illustrate that argument is called The Angelus, the call to forgiveness at the end of the day. And it's the piece that I contributed to the book. What you need to know about it is that the date line is May 25th, 2025. So you see that I'm writing as if I were a very elderly woman 15 years from now, looking back at what happened during the time between now and 15 years into the future when she's writing. May 25th, 2025. All those years, the Swainson's thrushes were the first to call in the mornings. That's when I would take a cup of tea and walk into the meadow. Swallows sat on the highest perches, whispering as they waited for light to stream onto the pond. For years, there were flocks of goldfinches. After my husband and I poisoned the bull thistles on the far side of the pond, the goldfinches perched in the willows. The garbage truck backed down the lane, beeping its backup call, making the frogs sing even in the day. I don't know how many frogs there were in the pond then, thousands, tens of thousands. When the eggs hatched, there were tadpoles. I have seen the shallow edge of the pond black with wiggling tadpoles. There were that many, each with a song growing inside it. In the years when the frog choruses began to fade, scientists said it was a fungus, or maybe bullfrogs were eating the tadpoles. No one knew what to do about the fungus, but people tried to stop the bullfrogs. Standing on the dike, my neighbor shot frogs with a pellet gun, embedding silver BBs in their heads 12 holes until she said, "How many holes can I make in a frog's face before it dies? Give me something more powerful." So she took a shotgun and filled the bullfrogs with buckshot until legs snapped, faces caved in, they slowly sank away. Ravens belled from the top of the oak. When the bats stopped coming, they said that was a fungus too. When the goldfinches came in pairs, not flocks, we told each other the flocks must be feeding in a neighbor's field. No one could guess where the thrushes had gone. The fields were as empty as the perfect emptiness of a bell, the perfectly shaped absence ringing the Angelus, the evening song, the call for forgiveness at the end of the day. As it happened, that was the spring when our granddaughter was born. I brought her to the pond so she could feel the comfort I had known there for so many years. Killdeer waddled in the mud by the shore, but even then, not so many as before. By then, the pond had sunk into its warm, weedy places, leaving an expanse of cracked earth. I held my granddaughter in my arms and sang to her then an old lullaby that made her soften like wax in a flame, molding her little body to my bones. Birds and the butterflies fly through the land. Go to sleep, you little baby. She fell asleep in my arms, unafraid. I will tell you, I was so afraid. Poets warned us, writing of the heartbreaking beauty that will remain when there is no heart to break for it. But what if it's worse than that? What if it's the heartbroken children who remain in a world without beauty? How will they find solace in a world without wild music? How will they thrive without green hills edged with oaks? How will they forgive us for letting frog songs slip away? It isn't enough to love a child and wish her well. It isn't enough to open my heart to a bird-graced morning. Can I claim to love a child if I don't use all the power of my beating heart to preserve a world that nourishes children's joy? Loving is not a kind of la-di-da. Loving is a sacred trust. To love is to affirm the absolute worth of what you love and to pledge your life to its thriving, to protect it fiercely and faithfully for all time. Ring the Angelus for the finches and the swallows. Ring the bells for frogs floating in bent reeds. Ring the bells for all of us who did not save the songs. Mother of God, ring the bells for every sacred emptiness. Let them echo in the silence at the end of the day. Forgiveness is too much to ask. I would pray for only this, that our granddaughter would hear again the little lick of music, that grace note toward the end of a meadowlark's song. Meadowlarks. There were meadowlarks. They sang like angels in the morning.
So, as the answers came in, the essays came in, we had some idea that they'd fall into certain categories. Not yet, sorry. I don't really have a slide for this. You'll have to look at this terrible slide. And they fell into these categories. And so what was really heartening was that there was what one might think of as a kind of litany of reasons why we have this obligation. So if our question is, do we have a moral obligation to take action to protect the future of a planet in peril, another way to think about that question, the answers, and I'm going to weave in some of the answers from what you all did this last week. The answers look like this. Yes, for the survival of humankind. Yes, for the sake of the children. Yes, for the sake of the earth itself. Yes, for the sake of all forms of life on the planet. Yes, to honor our duties of gratitude and reciprocity. Yes, for the full expression of human virtue. Yes, because all flourishing is mutual. Yes, for the stewardship of God's creation. Yes, because compassion requires it. Yes, because justice demands it. Yes, because the world is beautiful. Yes, because we love the world. Yes, to honor and celebrate the earth and earth's systems. Yes, because our moral integrity requires us to do what is right. Yes, to fulfill our commitment to empathy. Yes, hell yes, to avoid social injustices. Yes, to preserve the earth for future generations. Yes, to appropriately honor our sense of community and communities themselves. Yes, because the earth is our mother and we need to treat her as such.
Now we need to decide what we should do, Michael, because obviously it's not enough to just think about why we have to honor our moral obligations to the future. You know, our students come to us and they say, I get it. I'm totally with you on this climate change and environmental degradation. I understand what's at stake. I just don't know what to do. And that's really a very serious question.
So now next slide. So my essay is a kind of reaction. And the essay is called To a Future Without Hope. And what I'm really concerned about in this essay and in some of my work in general is what is it that motivates us? And what is it that doesn't, that takes our motivation away. And partly I'm driven in this essay by trying to understand the notion of empowerment. I want a motivation that empowers me and those around me. I don't want a motivation that is fickle, that is contingent, that somebody else can take away. And so what I often see in the environmental movement is this kind of polarization of motivations. And so some people think, if I can tell you really terrible stories, if I can lead you to despair, you'll act. And I grant it, that sometimes people do act out of despair. Sometimes they do amazing and miraculous things, but often they don't. And I see it in my students almost every single day, this desire to do good and right and beautiful and just things in the world that is so easily quashed by somebody sort of pointing out that maybe some professor pointing out that, you know, what you do isn't necessarily going to impact the world in this way. And because I've rested my motivation on outcomes, on the future, that power can so easily be taken away from me. So the polar opposite of despair is this notion of hope. And so what we do is we say, oh, but I can wrestle that back because I can have hope. And we've all heard these stories on the radio where it's a terrible story about some environmental degradation, and then we're obligated to say something about hope at the end of it. And I think one of the things that we're missing here is probably the most empowering motivation of all, and that is just integrity. This notion that I'm going to do something because it's the right thing to do. I will not tie my motivation to some future condition. I will not allow you to take my motivation away. I'm going to decide to be a whole person, integrity, integer, wholeness. So here's really what I want. I mean, what I'm blaming for all of this is our obsession about the future, our obsession about consequences. Hope is always, I think, about the future, it seems. What I really want is for those of us who want some other kind of motivation, I want us to replace the phrase, I hope, with, I resolve to do the work, I will be this kind of person, I will live this kind of life, or any sort of utterance that's really about integrity, really about virtue, as opposed to some future state. I think that what we need more than anything, need to save us from our own destructive fixation on the future, is absolutely nothing short of an individual and collective moral revolution. A revolution that includes abandoning hope, caring without hope, and a commitment where we're quietly, almost submissively, prop ourselves against those forces in the world that are working to bring ruin. What we need, I think, another way to think of this is we need the great yuck. Yuck. What we are doing is repulsive, collectively, individually. Yuck. This is not the way a responsible person lives. The great yuck can then be followed by the great no. No, I will not live this way. No, I will not be this kind of a person, this kind of an agent in the world. Finally, the great no will give way to the great yes. Yes, I will live a life of integrity, of respect, of humility, empathy, care, attentiveness. Yes, I will choose to live with dignity and grace, no matter what. But none of those things, the yucks or no's or yeses, is held hostage to the attainment of some future state. The future state doesn't matter. Every single person, each one of us, right now, at this exact moment in time, has the power to choose to live a moral life, to live what the ancient Greeks thought of as a life that was worth living.
And by doing that, by showing that kind of integrity, we can set ourselves up as a bulwark against those who would use us for destructive ends. We can refuse to allow people to make our lives into instruments of destruction just by doing what we believe is right. If you don't like that gyre of plastic that's swirling in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, don't buy your water in plastic bottles. If you don't like the way that the computer industry is setting little children up in China to be cooking heavy metals in junk piles, then don't need the next iteration of your iPod. You see, what we're meaning is that you can, by your decisions, make yourself into a moral agent and not allow other people to use you for their ends. So when my students come into my classes and they ask, what should I do? The thing that I often tell them is a quote from Frederick Buechner. Frederick Buechner is a philosopher, theologian from New England, and what he says is, if you're looking for your calling, Your calling is at that place, at the intersection between your great joy, your deepest, greatest joy, and the world's deepest need. Your calling is at the intersection of your deep joy and the world's greatest need. What do you value most of all? What do you really care about? What is it that you would live for? What would you like to be known for? What really gives you joy? That kind of deep, self-satisfied joy. And how does that match up against or with what the world needs from you? That's the question I say to my students you should ask. You should find that place. You should go there and do that work.
3, I think. I think we missed a couple. One more. There we go. So one of the things that we were asked to do when we put this book together that at first we resisted, and now it's becoming my favorite part of the book, is that we were told that you can't just sort of talk about theories and values without really grounding it. And so each section, each of these 14 sections really needs to end with a, what do I do? Kind of list or page or 2 pages. And Kathy and I really, we just rolled our eyes. They went all the way around. It was just so dramatic. Because we all know these lists, right? You go on the computer, you're like, what can I do to save the world? There's these lists all over the place. We call them light bulb lists because the first thing's always swapping out your compact fluorescent to compact fluorescent. Actually, now it's swapping out your compact fluorescents to LED lights. So we know that there are always sort of technological fixes. Or consumptive fixes. It's a different kind of thing that you consume. So we really resisted this. And then we took it seriously, and we thought, well, okay, if those are imaginatively impoverished, can we have sections at the end of these that are actually more imaginative? And so one of the things, what we want to kind of end with is we want to share with you some of these, a couple of these examples of, I think, more creative, certainly more creative than light bulbs, lists of, if you take this value seriously, if this is really where your great joy is, how does that show up in your life? And so the first one it comes at the end of the section that, yes, we have this affirmative obligation to the future to steward God's creation. So it's really a kind of religious value here. And so what if you take that seriously? How do you protect God's creation? Well, maybe it's time to think more seriously about this notion of sanctuary. We talk a lot about sanctuary. It's not just the nave of a church. It's a place of safety. That's what it means. And we can ask ourselves, are the sweeping lawns of our churches actually places that are safe for divine creation? Could they become a true sanctuary, bursting with birdsong and native plants, protected forever from poisons and bulldozers? And after your church grounds became a true sanctuary, what about the lands that your parishioners own? What about a real sanctuary movement that went way beyond our typical notion? Or what about this notion of preaching to the choir? Every week we come together to sing God's praises, but what can we do to protect the songs of creation? Could the choir itself become the protector of birdsong, the protectors of marshlands rich with calls of frogs? There are many kinds of music in the world. It's not enough to sing about them as they vanish. If those with beautiful human voices don't act to protect the voices of the birds and the frogs, who exactly will?
So what we're trying to do is encourage people to make their lives an embodiment of their values. That's really what it is. Make your lives an embodiment of your values. Think deeply about what you really care about, and then make your life into a work of public art that expresses those values. And we want to end this portion and ask your ideas with one last ethical action section. And this is the one that responds to the reason that, yes, we do have an obligation to the future because we owe a debt of gratitude to the earth for all its gifts. And then the question is, how can we make our lives an expression of gratitude? Write a song of praise and sing it in the street. Celebrate the season of harvest with feasting, the season of scarcity with fasting, the season of new life with dancing, and the season of ripeness with listening. For every gift you are given, give something in return, a planted seed, a suet scrap, a moment to notice the moon. Take nothing without noticing, a deep breath, a carrot salad, a drink of water or wine. Write thank you notes, which is what your mother taught you. Write to the soil. This is a great gift and you are kind to give it, and I hope you are well in the new year. Bury the note in the garden. Hold each gift in your hands. Examine it closely to understand how beautiful it is and astounding. This is how a gift becomes sacred. Make something of every gift you are given. Use it, but use it wisely and well. Imagine when you wake each morning what you will make of that day, the greatest of all the astounding gifts. Listen closely when the gift is music. Return it abundantly when the gift is love. Touch it gently when the gift is fragile. Protect it fiercely when the gift is vulnerable. Laugh aloud when the gift is joyous. Share it when the gift is truth. Use it bravely when the gift is freedom. When the gift is money, give it away. Above all, do not pretend to understand why you have been chosen to receive these gifts. This is the mystery of life.
One more stationary slide. So now is the time when we ask, this is the question and answer period, but we're going to turn it on its head because we're going to ask you a question. How do you like that? We're going to actually ask you two questions in two parts. So one of the things I mentioned that we're really trying to do is not just elicit 80 responses. It's not enough to have just 80 people. We need many, many more people than that, sort of offering up their justifications for why we have this obligation to the future. So our first question that we would love to hear your voices in response to is, do we have an obligation? This is the question that you've all been wrestling with, and we'll reiterate it. Do we have an obligation to protect the world for the future, and why? Why do we have this obligation? So we have two people with microphones, right? Yeah. So if you raise your hand.
And Michael, should we go on down here? We want to just fill the room with ideas. You know, there's great abundance of ideas. There's not going to be any decision making tonight. There's not going to be any sorting out of right or wrong. We're just trying to get this great affirmation of how we can think about this, how we can reason about our obligations. So one reason why it's our obligation, why we have an obligation to the future. Would you stand up?
Hello.
Hello.
My personal sense of obligation is love. I love the creation. I love the children. I love the people who are not even born yet. And I feel a strong sense of responsibility to all the things that I love.
Good.
That's beautifully said.
Yeah, first, I want to thank everybody for being here, because I write blogs and stuff that have to do with our environment and things, and it's good to see that there's so many others who care too.
Mm-hmm, yes.
I feel like I'm alone so much, you know. But anyways, yeah, I just want to say that, you know, I wrote something when the band was up there, because I was thinking about it. I might turn it into a poem or something. But, you know, Mother Earth provides so much for us. You know, but she can't speak for herself. So the least we can do is speak for her. So, you know, that's just part of the way I think about our obligation to speak for those who can't speak for us. And besides, on a spiritual end of things, you know, the Bible tells us to, you know, it commands us to look out for our natural resources, to take care of what's been given to us. So
Good. Great.
Yeah, and to listen when the earth does find her voice, to listen to what she's trying to tell us.
What if we are her voice?
Say more.
So yeah.
I mean, we are of this earth. We are material matter. Everything in this room comes from the earth, and we have a responsibility as part of the earth taking consciousness to handle that how we will with our choice of how we live in this manifestation. So if we choose to take advantage with greed and lust and desire for material wealth, it's temporary. It's an illusion. But the entire time, in the present moment, we are nothing more than a voice for the earth itself. And I mean, there's wonderful irony in people speaking against the earth when that's actually what they are. But we are I like to believe anyway, the continuing evolution of the earth becoming conscious of herself. And that's what we are here to help foster, I like to think anyway. And I feel that is, I love that you use the word integrity. I really appreciate you using that word, because it is bedrock. It's a very important concept for us to re-inherit. So thank you.
You know, I was talking to Alan Weissman, who wrote this book called The World Without Us, where he imagines what will happen to the earth after humans disappear. And I said to him, you were writing a very sad book. He says, no, you're going to have to demonstrate that to me. And the point that I tried to make was exactly what you're saying, is that it's through human beings that the earth acquires its capacity to celebrate itself, to weep for itself, to explain itself or seek its own meaning, and that would be a terrible, terrible loss. But it's also a huge responsibility to have this gift, to be able to give voice to these things that the earth is necessarily mute about. Speaks through us.
I liked what Ella was saying about how we're of the earth and, you know, giving the earth consciousness, but I also think that I think it's maybe not right for us to say that, you know, the earth doesn't have consciousness, and that, I mean, I tend to think that life, you know, anything with life is sentient. There, you know, every life is sentience, really. And, you know, I think species and the earth are crying out, saying, you know, you're destroying us. And there are 120 species a day going extinct. And if that's not, you know, the earth crying out to say, you know, do something more, then I don't know what is. And also, I think a lot of times we talk about the personal consumption changes, the personal lifestyle changes. Like you guys talked about the gyre in the Pacific Ocean, and, you know, reducing our consumption of plastic. And I think that's problematic to me, because it puts it's something the environmental movement has done for so long, to put, you know, the responsibility on the individual. And it's such a I think it tends to feel like such a guilt trip for people, and the truth is that there's a system that created plastic that's giving us plastic. We didn't, you know, we wouldn't have created plastic on our own. It's, you know, a sociopathic culture that created something that can't be broken down. You know, nothing can eat plastic. It's just ridiculous. So I guess my thing is that, hell yes, we have a responsibility to protect the future, not only for future generations. I don't think we think about, I don't know if we really seriously think about the condition we're going to leave the planet in for our grandchildren. We talk about it all the time, but I mean, you know, are they going to be able to breathe the air and drink the water? I mean, that's what's most important. And like I said, those concentrating on the individual personal lifestyle changes, I think, diverts us from recognizing that there's distinct power structures that are in place that are destroying the planet. It's not our individual choices that are doing it. It's not our fault. It's those in power who are doing it, and we need to, I think, as a whole, be able to recognize that and confront them directly.
On top of what was just said, I believe that our biggest obligation is thought and reflection about what we do, not just collectively, but on an individual basis. And I think there is a little bit more about each individual doing their part. Yeah, there is a system, but when we decide collectively that the system's no longer what we need, then it becomes an individual practice, I suppose.
There's an interesting kind of argument to the last three comments, and that is to honor our role, perhaps, as not conscious beings, but the Earth's consciousness. I think there's an interesting, strong parallel argument. I'm not. I may have to think about it more, but we might say, well, what does it mean to be a conscious being? It means that there's part of you that's aware of you. It's not this part, I don't think. I mean, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's not this part. It's this part over here. So it's part of you is aware of you, that can make sense of the notion of, you know, is the whole healthy, for instance, the notion of health. And you can say the same thing about the earth, about any sort of organism. Is there part of it that's aware of it, that can understand its concept of, or its notion of health, and that could, can secure its notion of health? So it seems metaphorical, but I think it's actually quite a literal argument, and a kind of strong argument that could be made about this is our obligation as the consciousness of the earth.
There's an interesting argument that comes through the book, too, as to, and Derek Jensen engages it. He says, people say, we have met the enemy and it is us, quoting Pogo, and saying, we're the ones who are making choices as consumers. We're the ones who are leaving this toxic legacy. If it weren't for us as individuals, the corporations would have no power. And Derek Jensen says, well, that's not a good argument. I mean, in fact, if you define insanity as the inability to tell right from wrong, and corporations being persons cannot tell right from wrong, then the corporations are, and to the extent that they control us, we're being controlled by sociopaths. And his argument is that just as you argued, we shouldn't be distracted from this attempt to put blame on us. We should turn outside and we should understand that the situation in the world today is manifestly unjust. And it's particularly unjust to the children, it's particularly unjust to the poor, and it's beyond that, unjust to those who have no voice to defend themselves, which are people in the future. That those of us who are using the world today are using it to our benefit, taking all the benefits, and casting off the burdens on these defenseless people, manifestly unfair. So there's lots of different ways to think of it, because then the question is, what does that ask of us? Somebody else.
One thing that comes to mind to me is the analogy of it's almost like a relationship. It's a give and take, only so many people are taking and not giving back. I don't think that Mother Nature is by any means silent. We've had a tremendous amount of just disastrous, horrible things that have happened in the past even decade. And I think that everybody, when something like that happens, everybody starts to think about what should be done. The problem is it doesn't continue on for more than a year after the cleanup. So I think that's something that needs to be considered, is not just those rude awakenings of time that happens. It's every day that needs to continue.
What you say makes me tear my hair, because people say, what's it going to take to get people to act? What's it going to take? And the answer always comes, well, it's going to take some sort of natural disaster that's undeniable. Well, how many of these is it going to take? And here we have someone.
I like what you said about fairness, and I think you forgot the animals. And today at work, when I was telling somebody that I was coming here tonight, they said, there's not going to be, the change isn't going to happen until it looks like this all the time, pointing out the window with the wind. So I think we should try to prove them wrong,
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's a typical claim that it's a catastrophe or some sort of a cataclysm. But I think what we forget is that sometimes that's a kind of a moral cataclysm. And when we just say, I'm sorry, I just won't act this way anymore. I won't be that kind of a person anymore. I mean, to me, that's an amazing storm that might occur.
Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world. Yeah. And people are starting to call our situation the perfect moral storm.
I don't know if this response comes up very much, but perhaps it's worthwhile to explore. No, there is no ethical reason. There's no moral obligation for us to protect the planet. And if we don't look at that perspective, then maybe we're missing some insight that we can gain from looking at that. I mean, I think, what's the purpose of my life? When I look back on my life, when I'm hopefully much, much older, what will I think was of value in my life? And maybe there isn't an ethical or a moral aspect to it. Maybe it is just that I was following my instincts or my genetics or the things that have been passed down for tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. maybe there is no moral or ethical or religious or otherwise reason. And when we think of the 6 billion plus people on the planet, maybe it's worthwhile for us to think of what is the motivation for people? The motivation is they need to feed themselves and they need to keep themselves safe and secure. And so how, if there are those of us who desire for mass extinctions to stop and the planet to be saved, perhaps we need to think about, well, how can we frame it so that the people that just want to survive are, in their day-to-day lives, in the process of surviving, that their actions contribute to sustainability rather than to collapse and destruction. To say that there's a moral or ethical reason, as you mentioned about the corporations, implies that there must be some premise, right? There must be some premise on which we build our ethical framework. And I think it would be useful if we look from the perspective of what did people think about 100,000 years ago about ethics and morals? I mean, I think it was more about family, taking care of your family and yourself and your community and your tribe and your band and I don't know. I think that that's a perspective that's worth exploring. I mean, it's great to hear all the, positive, there's ethical reasons and we should save the earth because it's the right thing to do because of 14, 16 different reasons, but maybe we should look at the other perspective as well. Just a thought. Yeah.
Fascinating, and you've got two old philosophy professors up here just wanting so badly to respond. But we should give you a chance. Would you like to? Here.
I'd just like to bring back a point that Max said about being confrontational. He said, we have a responsibility to confront the systems of power, but I also think that we have a responsibility to be individually confrontational. And I think specifically my generation, I think that we're looking for new moral bounds and that we can help to create them. And I think that if you see someone litter, you have a responsibility to individually confront them and say, hey, you dropped something. And I just wanted to read one of the ethical action points from chapter 4, which I found particularly inspirational, which is, I will not worry about being a sanctimonious pain in the butt. I wouldn't worry 1 minute about trading a friendship for the ongoing existence of meadowlarks. Someone has to take a public stand, and if that makes other people feel guilty, maybe it's about time.
I was thinking of exactly that when you said that.
Were you?
Like, I wish I could remember that off the top of my head. I can't.
And I'd kind of like to follow from what you were saying, which is in general, what I was thinking about here in my seat before you talked about it, before you brought it up. And that's the word of obligation. I think the question had the word obligation in it. And there's a lot around obligation. Like, I was sort of thinking of it as, I don't know that I have an obligation to not cut my leg off. But it would be stupid to cut my leg off, which is really one of your 12 or 14 points, wasn't it? This is stupid, or however, it's killing us, or at least I'm not going to be able to walk. And I think that's really where I go with it, and I really value that people. I do really value the beauty and the justice, but that's not really where I go first. I go to, it's stupid. And when I think about that, then really, if that's where I go, then for me, what would really make a difference is education. It would. Knowledge and education. Because I think that everybody doesn't know that it's stupid, right? That apparently we don't get it, because we wouldn't be cutting our leg off if we were aware that's what we were doing.
So if I could just say a little bit, it seems to me that we've identified two values here. One is the value of continued existence, of our own continued existence, and the other one you mentioned was the value of our family, caring for our families. That what are the attitudes we have brought down with us through evolution? Well, certainly self-preservation, or at least the preservation of our progeny. Okay, preservation of our progeny. Let's take that as the basic thing. If that's our basic value, is the legacy we leave that preserves our children, that's a value, and that's a moral stand. That says that is really important to me, and I'm going to adjust my life to serve that value. And certainly if what we're interested in is the continued existence and the thriving of our children, to leave them a legacy in which they can flourish, then we would take steps to stop environmental degradation. So I'm not sure that we're talking anything more than strategy. And Alan, because when we start talking about what we most deeply value, we are going straight to ethics. And maybe it's not a good idea to frame it in those terms. And that's what Alan Wiseman said in this book. He said, forget moral obligation. You should not have a book about moral obligation. I'll only be in your book if I'm allowed to say it's not about moral obligation. What's it about? I said, Alan. He says, it's about self-preservation, which is the most selfish attitude there is. Well,
it's a moral obligation.
That's a moral obligation.
Whoops.
But if human beings have value, that's what you're saying, is that human beings have value. It's better that they exist than that they not. They bring something new and beautiful to the universe. They ought to continue to exist. Then it follows that we ought to take steps to ensure that they do. So you can build the moral argument on the most basic of these sentiments, which we call moral sentiments, or you could call them evolutionary inheritance. That would be my response.
Someone else ask action question? The action question?
Yeah, more here? Yes.
I think it's not a question of, do we have a moral responsibility, but the why. Obviously we do have a responsibility, but the why is, if you think about it, if you look at it, it's because you have the opportunity right now. Look at all the great points throughout our history as a species, as a human on this planet. Where would you have stood on a lot of the debates, whether women had the right to vote, segregation, the Civil War, just all them great points, where would you have stood? And we can't kid ourselves right now, maybe not this, it might be hard to pinpoint the exact moment, but we are in those times right now, historical time. We are going to be judged pretty harshly. And do you want to be going down knowing that it's one of those clowns that voted on the wrong side of it? You do have a chance, and you can do it, like what you said earlier about vote, what I call voting with your dollars, that I preach to our kids all the time. If you don't want to see little kids your age, 10 years old, sweating in some godforsaken factory in China, don't buy a PlayStation. Don't buy a plastic bottle because you don't want to kill fish in the ocean. So I'd like to hear more about that exploration of that idea about voting with your dollars, because we live in a democracy, but your only real vote that counts is every dollar in your pocket. So you do have the opportunity right now to make a change, and to not act on it is foolish.
Really important point that we are consumers. Part of us is we are consumers, and so we have power as consumers. We can vote with our dollars. And we must refuse to allow corporations to reduce us to nothing but consumers. We must invent ourselves. We must have a full notion of what it means to thrive as a human being, divorced from what we own. And so, yes, it's what choices we make as consumers, but it's also choices we make about how we define ourselves as something quite more significant than a consumer. Oh, great, thanks.
Hi. The
Hi.
reason that I believe that we should save the world is this is an awareness that has not risen before. For example, sex education before was not an issue, and in the recent decade it has been an issue, so our children had been educated earlier and earlier. So I think that this is a great awareness for our salvation that most people put at the bottom of their list, and unknowingly this awareness will be ignored and it will kill us in time, because unacknowledgement issues, and now that we have acknowledged the issue, our world is growing so fast due to technology, medicine, weapons, and destructions that we don't make this such a big issue. We ignore it. And this awareness is not emphasized in our teaching, therefore our children and our other children later on will not understand how the impact of our nature, our resources are important. So then to conserve it will save ourselves. Like an epidemic, it's like an anecdote. and to teach them that not to be selfish, to love nature and ourselves, because if nature vanishes, that means it's an end to us also. That's what I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think looking at it from a couple perspectives. One is just a personal perspective. Another, I'm here for a psychology class, so we're looking at it from a psychological point of view. Personally, I liked what you mentioned about stewardship, and I think the definition of stewardship is what you do with something that belongs to someone else. So how you manage what belongs to someone else. And so as stewards, we're managing the earth, and it belongs to everybody, not just me. But I think the common denominator is if you had a bunch of, doesn't matter what belief system you have, whether you're a Christian, whether you're an evolutionist, it's like playing sports. You can get people from all different faiths, different backgrounds. They can come together and play a game of softball, and it doesn't matter you know, what belief system they have. They can come together, and they can be unified. And I think that's what it's going to take, is for people around the world to become unified. And then from a psychological point of view, like Kohlberg's theory of moral development talks about people changing their belief system, their thoughts, you know, by changing, you know, their values. So I think that's what it's going to take, is people just being, changing their thoughts and their values and coming together.
Thanks. Yeah, let's do one more, and then we have one more question for you. Yes, when you stand up so we can hear you.
The argument that we need to preserve the earth for posterity, for future generations.
Run.
It makes me think about when I was a kid and I would go up north to where my grandmother lived in, you know, rural area, acres and acres of woods, where I would just go out and I would play, and, you know, and it was just something primal about it. I would, you know, pretend that I'm like a hunter-gatherer. I mean, I didn't know what that was at the time, but, and I think, and you know, those are some of the most fond memories that I have from my childhood. And to think that future generations could be denied that, I think is just deeply immoral.
We have, we've been asked to wrap this up by 9 o'clock, and we actually have another question that we would love to ask your input on, and it is this. You know, what we'd love to do next is fill the room with people telling us what they are actually doing. You know, what do you value most? And as a result, what are you actually doing? Just one small thing, so that we can all go away with a whole new set of inspirations for how we might embody our deepest values. So if you could just stand up in place and just tell us, you know, one right after another, what are you actually doing?
I have brain barrels.
All right, somebody else. Right here. Shout it out.
Actually, I walk just about, if something's in walking distance, I walk. I live 2 miles from school, and I walk every day because I think the air, the environment needs to breathe too, you know, so I don't want to fill it with fossil fuels.
Good. Another one. Go ahead.
I would try and talk to my financial advisor about where to invest stock, because as an affluent area, especially in rapids, or just as people, a very economic society, one of the biggest differences we can make is who we're investing in and how we're, like our mutual funds or stocks, or because those companies' practices are some of the huge drivers of these problems. And so if we're trying to fight on a small scale and not buy plastic bottles, but we're investing in the companies that are creating them, it's kind of a vicious cycle. So we really need to be aware about who we're investing in.
So we can refuse to invest in companies that profit from death. Yeah.
I pick up trash.
I actually, is it on? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
I actually was banking with a major chain bank, Chase Bank, and also was approached by JP Morgan to do some investing. I looked into them. They are both responsible for mountaintop removal investments. I printed out the reports on Huntington Post and went into both institutions and said, this is why I'm closing my account with Chase, and this is why I'm not going to invest with your company. I actually specifically had asked JP Morgan, do you have a green fund? Do you have a set of green corporations that I could invest with? And they looked at me like I was an alien, actually. And I said, well, once you have that, I'll invest with you. But in the meantime, you can give me no guarantee that I'm not investing in mountaintop removal by funding any of your corporations. And the person that I closed my account with Chase, quit her job in 2 weeks. She gave her 2 weeks notice that day. So because she just she had no idea that the company she was working for was doing that.
Wow.
And she was on the fence anyway, to be fair, and that was kind of the straw that broke
And
her
you
back.
pushed her over the fence. Nice.
Cool. There was someone there. Yeah.
On the act of walking, I missed the bus about 2 weeks ago, and I had to walk to school, which was actually kind of liberating. But I noticed all the garbage in vacant areas on my way up from the west side. And I think that I'm not the only person that gets depressed by seeing litter everywhere. And I think one of the first main steps would be just maybe uniting in this city specifically, but making it bigger and just having powwows of picking up garbage and recycling the garbage that you see. I mean, I was thinking about that. I'm the president of the Green Council at Kendall, so I'm going to see what I can do. But if anybody else is interested, look us up on Facebook.
Let's pick you up way in the back. Can you just stand up and shout at us? Moss, would you repeat what she said into the phone, in the microphone?
Academic Service Learning has does regular community cleanup, so please feel free to contact Academic Service Learning, which is on Facebook as well.
And sir, here.
I've composted 100% of my household food waste for 21 years.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, keep them going. Right here.
I don't own a dryer. I have a clothesline and I know how to use it.
I'm not afraid.
And I've just finished the Master Naturalist course through Michigan State Extension Service, and am now putting in hours removing invasives and helping to restore habitats.
Nice. Great.
I still use toilet paper, it's true, but I use no other paper products in my home, so handkerchiefs and rags aplenty. Take care of that.
I compost as well.
I vow not to vote for any political candidate that takes money from corporate interests that do not suit me. So if you find anyone that fits that criteria, let me know, because I haven't yet.
Yeah. And here's down here in the front. Sir.
I started a nonprofit organization dedicated to sustainability, and we're hosting a conference a couple weeks from now with Joseph Tainter, who's written a book about collapse and sustainability. And the goal of the organization is not just to encourage localism and localization, which means people buying, well, people trying to consume much less, and what they do consume, consuming local. But the second kind of goal is to try to figure out what's wrong with the current economic system, governmental system, religious systems that we have, and to come up with something that could actually be sustainable. So that's part of the goals of the various conferences we have, including the one we have coming up next month.
It's going to take the greatest exercise of the human imagination the world has
I already
ever
know what
seen.
she does. She's a wonderful singer in a wonderful band.
Thank you. As a high school student, a lot of kids my age, just from personal experience, don't even know what's happening to their planet right now, the planet they live on, the planet they go to school on, everything. They don't know what's happening. So what I do is I try to get my voice out there, try and educate them, try and tell them that, hey, this is going on right now, and you're cool if you stop it. You're cool. That makes you cool, I promise. And I just get my voice out there and let them know.
Where's the other microphone?
Oh, way up in the back, and right here's one. Yeah.
I follow my partner around and turn off the lights that are left on during the day.
I do that too.
I'm involved in sustainability in construction, and I'm going to be joining the LEAD program here in the next meeting on campus.
Great.
You know, she recycles with passion.
With passion. The passion part's the most important.
That is important. Enjoy, right? Good. Yeah.
I'm just putting my voice out there as much as possible to first try and get youth involved in this movement again. It doesn't seem vital to them, I think, and we've got to try and reframe it to get their involvement, and also just to try and shift the discourse as much as possible to either get this movement thinking more like a political resistance movement, or failing that, if it won't do it, then starting a new movement entirely.
We one in the back.
Oh, myself and my family, we just find ourselves recycling a lot more.
That really matters. And here.
I ride my bike every day, and except for when I need to do laundry at my parents'. But even down Lake Michigan Drive and the streets that are busy, because the more you ride on those roads, the more people recognize people are wanting to ride on those roads, and the more people recognize that there's a need to slow down and watch for people who aren't in vehicles. If I don't ride on those roads, it's to my own detriment.
Yes, thank you. And behind you there too, Marianne.
I have integrity. I don't just say something. My actions convey my words, and I think because of the example my husband and I set for my son, he knows to pick up his trash off the street, and he yelled at a complete stranger who's 3 years old 2 days ago and said, "You drop that, pick that up, don't litter."
Raising a tiny little sanctimonious pain in there.
Sanctimonious Junior. Is this working? Okay. It's hard to tell. We got a U.S. Green Building Council student chapter going at Grand Rapids Community College, and we're trying to educate students and faculty about sustainability within buildings and within the planet. And we've been going now for about 9 months, and hope to go to the national we'll be going to the national conference. So I believe in the political action end of it, because that's where things have to happen. So.
Good. Yeah, and in design. Mm-hmm.
Hi, after enrolling into Professor Lassert's class for 2 months, I have actually planted 3 trees in my backyard, taught my children to recycle, and spreading the words throughout my family, because we are from a third world country. We don't know of such thing, and this is an awareness issue. Therefore, we're teaching the unknown, the generations, the X generations about this issue. And that's what I did. I'm very proud.
You should be proud. Yeah, and all of you should be proud. And we are really, it's a wonderful, gratifying outpouring of compassion and also commitment that I think is extraordinary, and we laud you and we love you. Let's end, because it's time, and let's end with Gary Snyder, who wrote this poem for the children, which I think is a lovely expression of what to do. He says, for the children: the rising hills, the slopes of statistics lie before us, the steep climb of everything going up, up as we all go down. In the next century or the one beyond that, they say, our valley, pastures, we can meet there in peace if we make it. To climb these coming crests, one word to you and your children: stay together, learn the flowers, go light. Thank you all very, very much.